President Trump was elected with a mandate from the American people to make this government more efficient. He campaigned across this country with Elon Musk, vowing that Elon was going to head up the Department of Government Efficiency, and the two of them, with a great team around them, were going to look at the receipts of this federal government and ensure it's accountable to American taxpayers. That's all that is happening here.
Elon Musk is now taking aim at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and he and his Department of Government Efficiency continue combing through federal agencies. In his wake, Musk is leaving a trail of abruptly shuttered programs, furloughed employees, and lawsuits challenging his authority. In response to one of the lawsuits accusing DOGE of unlawful action, the Trump administration agreed to restrict access to Treasury Department payment systems. But Musk has mostly gone unchecked, with President Trump giving him wide latitude to carve up the federal bureaucracy. Joining me to discuss this and more, Cate Martel, national political reporter and author of the 1230 Report newsletter. If you don't subscribe, hit pause and then come back.
Yeah.
Cate, you've been covering Trump's first 100 days in office. We're nowhere near to 100 yet, but there has been a lot coming from the administration. What do you think is most important to focus on?
Well, Drew, we're only 17 days into the administration, even though, to me at least, it feels like a month or two. And, so far we've seen the president hit the ground running. On Capitol Hill, he has confirmed 12 of his cabinet nominees. That very well might be 13 by the end of the day with his OMB director nominee. As far as cabinet nominations, that has been really what's happening on Capitol Hill. Otherwise, we've kind of seen a big slowdown of his Capitol Hill agenda. That's why we saw Trump meet with congressional Republicans at the White House today to try to find, some agreement on the path forward. Now, where all the action is really happening is within the executive branch. We've seen the president issue more than 50 executive orders in the past 17 days. Most notably today and this week, we saw him ban transgender athletes from participating in sports and create a new task force to eradicate anti-Christian bias. Those have been two major programs that have gotten a lot of attention. And to define the last week, other major things that have happened is we saw the president really ruffle feathers by suggesting the idea of the U.S. buying the Gaza Strip and taking control over it. He also delayed a potential trade war with our partners in Mexico and Canada. We did see the tariffs go into place with China. And other than that, the other biggest thing that's happening is Elon Musk. We're seeing him slowly start to dismantle a lot of government agencies and really have a major effect in the federal government, Drew.
Let's talk more about Musk's crusade. USAID is one thing. The cost-benefit analysis of foreign aid can be difficult to explain. But Medicare and Medicaid, these are big programs that have a huge impact on the lives of Americans. Elon says that's where the big money fraud is. Is Musk going to take a hatchet to entitlement programs?
It's a good question, and an open question right now that concerns a lot of Americans very fairly. We did see that last week President Trump did attempt to try to freeze all federal aid. He did most notably note that that is excluding payments directly to Americans, so that did not affect entitlements. But we have seen that his team, the DOGE representatives, have had access to some of these programs that involve entitlements, including some sensitive tax information. So there very much are open questions of what does this mean for these entitlement programs, because as you mentioned, Elon Musk does want to take a hatchet to some of these programs that he argues are really expensive and have a lot of fraud and waste, but at the same time, a lot of Americans really heavily rely on them.
Courts are starting to weigh in on some of these executive orders and kind of the executive action more broadly that the Trump administration is trying to take. We talked about blocking access to the payment systems at the Treasury Department. Also, a judge weighing in to block this deal that the Trump administration is trying to make to allow federal workers to resign and get 8 months of severance. Is there a risk with Trump relying so heavily on executive orders to fulfill his agenda that the courts could just one by one start ticking these off and kind of canceling out what he's trying to get accomplished?
In short, yes, that is exactly it. That, Trump has the ability to unilaterally act by these executive orders, but they're not as protected as going through Congress. That is why, Congress is set up the way it is to be complicated so that it does usually stand legally. And by, having these overreaching actions taken by the executive branch, there are a lot of open questions over what the legal challenges would be. We've already seen a number of legal challenges, like you mentioned, and we're seeing a lot of labor unions start to push back. I can expect any number of these controversial issues will be headed to the courts. But, as you and I were even talking about earlier, that this is, by Trump doing all of this at once, it's kind of hard for a lot of these legal pushback to really consolidate their efforts because they're spread out so finely to try to work on each of these issues that he has put forth so quickly.
I don't know if there's enough lawyers in courtrooms to have hearings on all the things that he's putting out at the same time. Elon Musk and conservatives are using kind of this pattern to post on social media about these federal programs. It creates a rage, and then they go after the spending of those programs. They would argue the spending is wasteful. There's often some half-truths and mistruths in what they're actually saying. You can see the hubbub that happened over Politico over the last few days. But there's some polling showing that Trump's involvement in the Trump administration is rubbing Republicans the wrong way. After the election, 47% of Republicans said that they wanted Musk to have a lot of influence in the Trump administration. Now, that number is down to just 26%. I wonder if the style and substance of Musk playing such a prominent role in the Trump administration, remember people voted for Trump, not Musk. I wonder if he's kind of wearing thin on people.
Yeah, I think that polling sure does reflect that we've already seen a significant drop among Republicans in wanting Elon Musk to have so much power. And as you can imagine, that number is vastly lower for independents and Democrats. And as you mentioned, American people have voted for Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. We're not seeing much of J.D. Vance. We're seeing a lot of Trump and a lot of Elon Musk. Now, he has only been in the political picture for just a few months. That was following the first assassination attempt of President Trump. That's when we first saw Elon Musk on the campaign trail with him. And just a few short months later, he is now making some major changes to the federal government. And I think we're starting to see this is so early on. As I mentioned, we're only 17 days into this administration. But as he continues to have more power and continues to try to dismantle agencies and make major changes and try to negotiate behalf on the president on Capitol Hill, those are some issues where I think after a while may run thin because, as I mentioned, people voted for Trump. They did not vote for Elon Musk.
Yeah, I want to ask a little bit more, too, about the executive orders. Yesterday, Trump signed this ban on transgender women in sports. Today, it's this instructing AG Pam Bondi to eradicate anti-Christian bias. Trump talked about that this morning. Let's take a listen.
This task force will be to immediately halt all forms of anti-Christian targeting and discrimination within the federal government, including at the DOJ, which was absolutely terrible, the IRS, the FBI, terrible, and other agencies.
Has Trump given examples of what he considers anti-Christian bias in the government?
What his examples have been is exactly what he talked about in the campaign trail. It's all these cultural issues and the culture war that we've seen play out. That's exactly what he's pointing to and what he is arguing that he wants to eradicate. But it certainly will be controversial, Drew.
All right, that's all I got. Cate Martel, thanks so much.
Thanks, Drew.
A new video from Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth shows the first flight of migrants has arrived at Guantánamo Bay in Cuba. In a video posted on Hegseth's X account, migrants in waist chain restraints and handcuffs are seen being escorted from the plane to vehicles by military personnel. The Trump administration has said it plans to use the facility to detain thousands of migrants. The facility has been used to house military prisoners, including several involved in the 9/11 attacks. It became infamous for reports of torture and abuse. The Biden administration made efforts to slow down operations at the prison camp with just 15 detainees still present as Biden left office. The move is the latest in the Trump administration's plan to remove individuals without legal status in the U.S. Agreements have been set up with Colombia, Venezuela, and El Salvador to accept deported migrants. Mexico has deployed the first of 10,000 National Guards at the U.S. border after President Trump threatened the country with 25% tariffs. The masked and armed Mexican National Guard members arrived along the border separating Ciudad Juarez and El Paso, Texas. Patrols are also stationed along other parts of the border near Tijuana. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum ordered the National Guard to reinforce the border and crack down on fentanyl trafficking after Trump threatened crippling tariffs against the country. In exchange, the country asked the U.S. to do more to stop the flow of high-powered guns into Mexico, which are being obtained and used by Mexican criminal groups. The tariffs are now delayed for 1 month. President Trump has been putting a spotlight on tariffs lately. In today's Political Minute, News Nation Washington Bureau Chief Mike Vaquera breaks down the data behind America's top trading relationships.
American Trade in Focus. I'm Mike Vaquera, News Nation Washington Bureau Chief. Tariff talk has taken center stage since Trump took office for a second time. Most of the conversation focusing on 3 countries, Mexico, Canada, and China, and the economic implications are significant. These 3 nations happen to be the country's top 3 trading partners, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. Last year, Mexico did the most business with the U.S., making up almost 16% of all U.S. trade. Canada followed, just north of 14%, and China came in 3rd place with almost 11%. These 3 countries combining for more than 1/3 of total trade for the United States just last year. The U.S. also operated at a deficit with all of them. Last year, the total U.S. trade deficit increased to a record-setting $1.2 trillion. I'm Mike Vaquera, and this is the News Nation Political Minute.
You can find more news and analysis from Mike and his colleagues 24/7 on News Nation. To find News Nation on your screen, go to joinnn.com. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Drew Petrimoulx. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hills YouTube channel, and come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.